The 18th century is often referred to as the Age of Reason or the Age of Enlightenment, but sometimes more fairly simply as the Age of Voltaire. Voltaire was precociously talented as a poet. At the age of only 24, he had his first verse tragedy performed at the Comédie Française. By then, he'd already begun work on an epic poem about the French religious civil wars of the 16th century, glorifying Henry IV as the king who brought peace by pragmatically converting from Protestantism to Catholicism. Right from the start, Voltaire's views on religion were expressed robustly. He was not an atheist, in part because he thought that some minimal belief in a deity was useful for social cohesion. Voltaire's God had created the world, instilled in us a sense of good and evil, and then basically taken a back seat. This was known as rational religion, or in the 18th century called natural religion or deism, and it had no truck with metaphysics of any kind. Voltaire was basically a man of reason who loathed fanaticism, idolatry, and superstition. That men can kill each other to defend some bit of religious doctrine which they scarcely understand is something he found repellent, and he reserved his greatest hatred for the clerics who exploited the credulity of believers to maintain their own power base. Voltaire wanted religion, but not the church. For obvious reasons, the Catholic authorities were not keen for Voltaire's poem about Henry IV, La Henriade, to be published in France. So Voltaire decided to go and publish it in London instead, and in 1726 went and travelled to England. What began as a business trip soon turned, however, into something quite different, and Voltaire ended up staying in England for some 2.5 years. He learnt to speak English fluently, got to know writers and politicians, and became a great admirer of English Protestant culture. He decided to write a book about his experience of England, and the Letters Concerning the English Nation appeared first in English in 1733. The French authorities were horrified. The book was censored, and Voltaire only narrowly avoided prison. That's because the book presented an informal portrait of English culture in a witty and ironical style, looking in turn at religion, politics, science, and literature, in ways that were critical, implicitly, of French culture. If one religion only were allowed in England, the government would very possibly become arbitrary. If there were but two, the people would cut one another's throats. But as there are such a multitude, they all live happy and in peace. Voltaire's message is clear. Religious differences are trivial and separate men, while trade is important and brings them together. His conclusion that the plurality of religions in England leads to a more peaceful society is, of course, a covert criticism of France, where the Catholic Church was so dominant. The Letters Concerning the English Nation also discuss Locke and Newton, thinkers then poorly known in France. The subject matter might seem challenging, but Voltaire is a past master at popularizing difficult material. Ask any schoolchild today what they know about Newton, and they'll tell you about the apple falling on his head. And the survival of this anecdote is due entirely to Voltaire. He heard it from Newton's niece. After Voltaire used the story in his Letters Concerning the English Nation, everyone remembered it, and Voltaire left his mark on English popular culture. Voltaire struggled with the question of good and evil, the problem at the heart of his best-known work, Candide, which was published in 1759 and was a bestseller from the moment it appeared. Translated into every possible language, it remains the most widely read work of the European Enlightenment. Candide, or optimism. The hero of Candide, as his name tells us, is an innocent anti-hero. He is enthralled to his tutor, Pangloss, who preaches the philosophy of optimism. This is not optimism in the modern sense of looking on the bright side. Optimism, spelt with a capital O, and as expounded by the German philosopher Leibniz, was an attempt to answer the age-old problem of evil. Why, if God is good, does he permit the existence of evil in the world? To which the 18th century Leibnizian optimist replies, evil is all part of some greater pattern of good. All partial evil, universal good, as the English poet Pope put it. In other words, evil doesn't really exist at all. It's just something which man imagines because of his limited view of the world. You might think this sounds like a bit of a confidence trick, and Voltaire certainly did. But this idea did find widespread acceptance in the 18th century. Candide's great mission was to put this philosophy to the test. One of the world's most famous phrases is, "One must cultivate one's own garden." We must grow our vegetables, we must tend to our lands, or we need to work our fields. But what did Voltaire really mean with his gardening advice? Essentially, that we must keep a good distance between ourselves and the world, because taking too close an interest in politics or public opinion, what people are talking about, these things are a fast route to aggravation, danger, and mental unwellness. We should know enough at this point that humans are just troublesome and will never achieve, at a state level, anything like the degree of logic and goodness and kindness we would so long for. And so we should never tie our personal moods to the condition of a whole nation or people in general. Otherwise, we'll be set to weep continuously. We need to live in our own small plots, not the heads of strangers. At the same time, because our minds are haunted and prey to anxiety and despair, we need to keep ourselves busy. We need a project. It shouldn't be too large a project or dependent on too many people. The project should send us to sleep every night, weary but satisfied. It could be bringing up a child, writing a book, looking after a house, running a small shop, or managing a little business. We should give up on trying to cultivate the whole of humanity. We should give up on things at a national or international scale. Take just a few acres and make those your focus. Take a small orchard and grow lemons and apricots. Who cares what's happening in Constantinople or what's up with the next Grand Mufti? Live quietly like the old Turk, enjoying the sunshine in the orange bower next to your house. This is Voltaire's stirring, ever-relevant form of horticultural quietism. We should never forget that Voltaire was also a brilliant writer, one of the greatest stylists the French language has ever known. The power of his ideas had a lot to do with the power of his expression. Many writers made fun of miracles. No one did so as hilariously as Voltaire. Always Voltaire had an ear for the telling phrase, "If God had not existed, it would have been necessary to invent him." It's a good line, even in English. Voltaire's legacy in our present debates about religious toleration remain extremely potent. Hardly a week passes without an article in the press quoting, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." This rallying cry of tolerant multiculturalism is so potent that if Voltaire hadn't said it, we would have had to invent it.